That is why we must now, for the sake of future generations, actively study the world's reaction to various aspects of the Russian-Ukrainian war, different environments, and the work of Russian agents. Even relying on this small, modest source base, we can create fairly complete descriptions. Studies of the Russian-Ukrainian war are so multifaceted that they are not limited to the military aspects.
Hello and welcome to Ukraine in Flames, a special project by Ukraine Media Center and NGO Euro-Atlantic Course. And I'm your host, Myroslava Yaremkiv. Historical science and historians should support the armed forces of Ukraine in every possible way. Conduct professional research, communicate with foreign colleagues, and disseminate objective and correct information about Ukraine and its past in mass media and the worldwide network to compete with Moscow ideologues and falsifications. We need to study this war systematically today. In today's episode, we're going to talk about why it is necessary to study the history of the modern Russian-Ukrainian war, how the emotional component affects the modern analysis of hostilities, and whether the capabilities of a historian differ in military uniform and civilian attire. If you want to learn more about this subject, please continue watching this video and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss our videos in the future. With the beginning of the full-scale aggression, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine set the following tasks for military historians. First, to record the chronology of the war of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, to highlight the course of military actions on the territory of Ukraine, and to create military historical descriptions of the war that began in 2014 and its apogee, a full-scale invasion of Russian troops in February 2022. Secondly, based on the analysis of documentary material, conduct a comprehensive military historical study of the strategy, tactics, forms, and methods of use of the armed forces of Ukraine in order to further implement the experience of military art in the conditions of wars of a new conceptual type. More on that, please welcome Doctor of Historical Sciences and Head of the Archeography Department at Institute of Ukrainian Archaeography and Source Studies, Viktor Brekhunenko.
In order to foresee all Putin's moves in a global sense, not in a military operational sense, because the military operational sense is dictated by modern weapons, modern equipment, and so on, but in terms of his conceptual approach, we have to look at previous Russian-Ukrainian wars and look for analogues. And in his scorched earth tactics, which he demonstrated in Mariupol, Bucha, etc. And now he demonstrates it in Kharkiv, Kherson, and elsewhere. It was not an absolute surprise to me that this tactic was adopted from the first days of war. The direction of key strikes, ideological and information concepts, they all impose on previous experience. Against this background, it is extremely important to study modern warfare in all its smallest details in order to be able to use it in the future, either in the Russian theater or perhaps in other wars. I don't think anyone doubts that the world, unfortunately, has not overcome the era of wars. We need to have a reliable basis of historical knowledge in our analysis of both the operational and tactical situation and geopolitical factors in general. That is why we must study this war, its course, and everything related to it extremely carefully. One of the key areas for us should be our own study of the world's reaction to the Russian-Ukrainian war. Now it is quite clear to all of us, I think, that the lessons of the eve of World War II have not been learned. The reaction to this war and these red lines that are being drawn and calls not to shoot at oil refineries and all the rest of it is the result of the fact that the way Hitler was going to World War II, the way the world was sliding towards World War II was not learned. That is why we must now, for the sake of future generations, actively study the world's reaction to various aspects of the Russian-Ukrainian war, different environments, and the work of Russian agents, so that everything can be clear for future generations, so that this external situation around this war was like in the palm of your hand, so that in the future everyone understands what consequences it leads to. Such things can only sober up those who call for various ceasefires, concessions, etc. No, we cannot do without it. In the West, no one will study this in the format we need. Only we who feel the course of this war on our own skin can set the necessary projection.
Studying this war should not be a process in itself. It is necessary to actively write and publish works that would be accessible to the general public. Despite the fact that the war has been going on for more than 2 years, we still have very few classic works devoted to the analysis of wars and military operations. Doctor of Historical Sciences, professor at National Academy of Land Forces named after Hetman Petro Sagaidachny, and chief editor of the Military Scientific Herald Andriy Kharuk will discuss the importance of conducting military operation studies now.
As for the source base in the form of the governing and administrative documents will not be available to us for another decade. I can bet that ordinary civilian historians will not have open access for publishing these documents for decades. This is the experience of previous world wars. And if not, what is the way out? We should use the sources that are currently available. The Center for Military History Research publishes monthly materials that are somewhat informative. These materials mostly contain information about the enemy actions. They give little information about our units. There are very few numbers of our units, for example, but we can work with this. It is a document, it's official. This is what we put into our source base. And we live in a modern information society. We have a lot of publications in the mass media and social networks, and therefore we can reconstruct the course of events through analysis and comparison. For example, when I was researching the Kharkiv, or rather the Slobozhan offensive operation, I was faced with the fact that even the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in its official reports, published information about the liberation of certain settlements only a few days after the liberation itself. Here it is necessary to analyze and compare. And we come to the third component, we come to a living history, to interviews with the participants of the events that also need to be approached in a balanced manner, to be analyzed and compared. Because human memory has its own specificity, it can be deceptive, etc. As for research areas, I have decided for myself that operations must be researched. Operations. Even relying on this small, modest source base, we can create fairly complete descriptions. I encountered this when, let's say, I was studying the same Hostomel operation. To understand the logic, for example, of the actions of the Russians in this operation, it was enough to look up their военная мысль, military thought, where everything was clearly outlined in several articles a few years before the attack. They acted according to what was prescribed in their governing documents, which is why they were unable to achieve complete success there in this Hostomel operation. For example, so the first area is the study of military operations. The subject is in great demand even abroad. I have come across this again and again. I cooperate with Polish editions, and they publish popular multi-circulation editions. For example, their magazine Nowa Technika Wojskowa, new military equipment. It publishes articles devoted to our war in every issue. They have already published 3 special issues dedicated to the Russian-Ukrainian war, and now they're preparing the 4th one. We do not have such popular literature at all. In principle, it does not exist.
Today, we must study the history of the Russian-Ukrainian war primarily for the sake of the memory of those people who died in it. It is also necessary that Russia, which constantly falsifies history and uses historical narratives to justify war, received a worthy rebuff. Colonel, candidate of historical sciences and deputy head of the Military History Research Center of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Vitaly Bidnyi, will talk about whether there is a difference between historians in military uniform and civilian historians when studying this war.
I would divide professional researchers into those who serve or work in military institutions and those in civilian institutions. Then, of course, those historians who work in the military environment, military institutions, in the armed forces of Ukraine, the security service of Ukraine, other components of the defense and security forces, of course, probably have more opportunities for research, have access to documents that are still not open, which will be closed for a long time. These are combat administrative documents without which it is probably impossible to write an objective history. Because as researchers, we have to rely on documents. But at the same time, studies of the Russian-Ukrainian war are so multifaceted that they are not limited to the military aspect. I believe that in this field of activity, there is room for everyone to put their efforts. For example, in the Institute of the History of Ukraine has published Volodymyr Golovko's monograph Invasion 2022 this year, which mostly describes the military-political aspect of this war. In addition to the military aspect, there are economic aspects that also need to be explored. Therefore, in order to highlight history systematically, objectively, and in a multifaceted manner, the efforts of historians are needed regardless of their military or non-military affiliation.
You've been watching a special project by Ukraine Media Center and Euro-Atlantic course dedicated to the Russian-Ukrainian war, Ukraine in Flames. In the description under this video, you can find information on how you can help Ukraine fight Russian aggression. If you find our work useful, please like and share this video. Slava Ukraini!